A Cuban leader on a Russian plane. Just 2 months after President Dmitry Medvedev visited Cuba, the invitation has been returned by President Raul Castro, who is in Russia for an 8-day visit. His arrival on a Russian-made Ilyushin 96 airliner, the same type as used by Russia's leaders, shows just how close the two countries have been in the past. Cuba's biggest ally after the communist revolution 50 years ago on the doorstep of the United States was the Soviet Union. Thousands of Cubans were educated in the USSR, and Havana is still the only Latin American city with direct flights by Russian airlines. The love affair crumbled, just as the Soviet Union did. But now, the old flames are in serious courtship again. Last November, President Dmitry Medvedev visited Cuba, along with a contingent from the Russian Navy. Moscow is keen to renew its influence in the region, which once included a big military presence.
I think it would have been fair for Russia to restore military links with Cuba. Not on the same scale as during the Soviet times, but maybe with the use of the Lourdes base, which we abandoned there.
Back in Moscow, it doesn't take long to find another connection between the two nations: the love of Cuban cigars. Since the economic blockade by the United States, which has imposed severe hardship on Cuba, the Soviet Union became a major importer of Cuban tobacco.
People in the Caribbean only used to smoke cigars, which is the most pleasant way of smoking. Cigars became a symbol of Cuba, just like a clock is a symbol of Switzerland.
As well as the tobacco, Cuban culture too is a big draw. This Cuban bar is popular in Moscow, with both Russians and Cubans living in the city. As their two nations step it out again, they have their own views on how the courtship should develop.
The Soviet Union used to support Cuba, even during the most critical times. I think Russia should do the same, and I would very much like to see it supporting Cuba.
It's important to preserve the relations we used to have during Soviet times, especially when it comes to relations between people, and not only economic and trade issues.
Cuba and Russia can give each other things they don't have. Cuba gives Russia weather it doesn't get in the winter, while Russia gives Cuba an export market for its goods. And energy, a hot topic in Russia, which could also be on the agenda during President Raul Castro's trip, with the Cuban ambassador suggesting the two countries could sign an energy deal.
The decades-long relationship between Russians and Cubans surely had its ups and downs. But President Dmitry Medvedev's recent visit to Havana seems to have brought them back on song. And we'll now have to wait and see if the Cuban leader, Raul Castro, will be in sync with his Russian counterpart. Yegor Piskunov, RT, Moscow.